Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Samal and I'm one of the engineers at RSNS. RSNS specializes in validation, project management, regulation, quality control and assurance, as well as clinical trials. So today I'll be speaking to you about packaging validation and the importance that it has on our industry. So we'll be looking at two things, both in medical devices and in the pharmaceutical world. So if we start off with the most important question, why do we need to perform packaging validation in the first place? So first and foremost, it is a regulatory requirement for both pharmaceutical and medical device companies. But apart from that, we also have many other benefits. So if we look at a few of the products that we are already familiar with, let's start with needles in the medical device world. Right, so needles are used for the injection of a certain drug through your muscles into your body. We can be using that in vaccines, as well as, for example, insulin, which is used for diabetics every day. Now, what we would like is when you get the package ready and you open up your needle, you want it to make sure that it's been sterile. Sterile package hasn't been tampered with, hasn't been opened, and therefore it's safe to use. We do know of the risks of HIV and AIDS where multiple needles are used for different people, and we want to be able to prevent that. Now, another product that we might be used to is capsules. So a pharmaceutical product, capsules are not always, but generally packaged in a blister pack. In a blister pack, you have a layer of aluminium foil, very thin, and on top, it's a PVC, which is a type of plastic that keeps the capsules in place. Now, when you receive that blister pack, you want to ensure that all the capsules are in there and that it has not been opened. Sometimes if there's a hole, there might be air, and the air may change the quality of the product. So we want to ensure that the product is closed and ready for use by the patient at the end of the day. Now, another product we can look at is a combination medical device product. That means that there is a pharmaceutical, say medicine, inside your medical device. One example that we can look at is the EpiPen. I'm not sure if you know, but the EpiPen has had multiple injection malfunctions where either it was injected too early or too late, and not at the time that it was pressed to be injected. Now, the EpiPen is a very important product. It's used in an emergency situation of an anaphylaxis reaction, and therefore it's vital that it works at the time that it's required to work. And this may have come from the package not being correct for the product, or it may have been damaged during its transportation. So we see that in addition to being a regulatory requirement, it's also important to conduct packaging validation for the safety, efficacy, and quality of our product. Now, before we go along, we can maybe talk about some important definitions which can help us along the way. So package integrity, which will help us here, is a measure of a package's sterile barrier. Right, we were talking about the needles, how we need them to be sterile. And we're wondering how we would like them to be presented to the user at the end of the day. Untouched physical condition. Now, packaging validation is this entire process that we speak about, right, which involves the identification of the materials and control of the materials that we use to package our product, as well as the processing variables, so how we make our product. So at the end, produce a product that is able to withstand all its specifications and comply to all requirements. Now, a sterile barrier system, also, which we spoke about with the needles, is defined as the minimum package that prevents any ingress, any entry of microorganisms into the product and keeps it at its sterile fashion. So this is really, really important. Before we start looking at what we do during packaging validation, there are a number of prerequisites that we need to ensure we comply with. Prerequisites which have to be set in stone beforehand. So first one is packaging equipment and layout. How are we producing our package? What is the machinery and the equipment that we need in order to make our package? Do we have the materials? Do we have SOPs, which is standard operating procedures for our equipment operation, for our maintenance, and our cleaning of our equipment, our machinery? Do we have a calibration program for the machinery that's used, for the measurements that we use, right? The measurement machinery. What about maintenance? Lastly, before we move on to the validation side of things, what are our operators doing? Have they been trained? Do they know how to operate the machinery and produce products with a higher quality? Now, moving on to the validation side, before any validation is conducted, we need to have a master validation plan. The plan would have all the requirements for validation, what we'll be validating and how, the sample size, etc. And that's then broken down into protocols, which contain the tests that we'll be conducting. That breaks down into the packing equipment, what we use to make our packaging products, and the packaging itself. So we're looking at now the big eye view. We said we need to start off with packaging validation prerequisites. That's our first step. Then it will break down into two things. We look at the packaging qualification, also the packaging process validation. So we've got product, our packaging, the process that we use to make it. And in small steps, we'll look at a number of things. We'd like to conduct validation with a design qualification, also known as a DQ, installation qualification, which is the IQ, OQ, which is operational qualification, and lastly, performance qualification, and that's done with a PQ. Now, often we might have to do something called revalidation. That's generally done when there's been a change in your process, or there are new risks which have come into play, or customer complaints over something that you weren't aware of. If there's been a change in the materials, let's say, we might have to reconduct validation on our processes. What your company might also do, and that's depending on the company's procedures, we might redo validation every 1 or 2 years, or have a review board whereby you decide whether revalidation needs to be conducted. So if we're going to the smaller details of packaging validation, where do we start? First and foremost, you need to understand your product. This is called product information gathering, understanding your product and the process that it takes to get there. Secondly, the product damage impact assessment. We've now understood the product. Now, what are the risks involved with that product? If something were to go wrong with the package during shipping, if it were to open, or if your process were to have errors in between. Thirdly, once we have this closed, we look at the testing selection. I've now understood my products and my risks, and I can now understand what tests are required to make sure that that package is validated at the end. So if we break them down, number 1, product information gathering. Where do we start? Think about the processes that are involved in creating that package. What packaging materials would I be using? We'll be looking at the primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging materials, which we're going to in the next slide. What is my product? Is it an aseptic, a sterile product, like my needles? Is it a final dose product, an API? What is the compatibility of the packaging materials? Can they react? We spoke about the blister pack, which has a PVC layer and an aluminum foil layer. Do they react? Is there any toxic chemicals that are going to be leaching out of your packaging onto your product? And lastly, are there any potential safety hazards? For example, flammability. So we spoke about the primary, tertiary, and secondary packaging, right? If we look at the packaging configuration, what does that mean? So you have your dosage product. We're going to take our example that we spoke about, the capsules. Product dosage goes into your primary package. The primary package is what's in direct contact with your dosage form, in this case being the capsules. Now you then go into your secondary package, which touches your primary package. You might have many of the primary packages together, which might be a small box. Now that small box goes into the tertiary package, which is your larger box, which contains many types and many together of your secondary package. Okay, now this all together, for logistical purposes, will go onto your pallets. So you can see this is one of the things that needs to be determined for your product. What is the packaging configuration? And it'll be different for each product. Now we speak about the product damage impact assessment, right? We're trying to understand the risks. We've got a product, we've got a package. We'd like to understand what are the risks if your product were to open midway through transportation, if something during your process were to go wrong. What impact does that have on 4 main categories? We'll be looking at the risk to safety, to patient safety, right? You use it at the end of the day. Secondly, efficacy and purity. Will there be any impact there? Thirdly, does that have any impact on the legislations, right? Does it break any regulatory requirements or any company requirements? And lastly, and this one is more for medical devices, does it impact the fitness for use of your product? Will your product still be usable at the end of the day? will it be dangerous to use? Once you've risk assessed under these 4 categories, we put them into different compartments, starting from critical, major A, to major B, and to minor. And you can see how your critical starts in red and your minor in green. And what we'd like to be doing is moving all our risks down to the green zone. And how do we do that? We try to find mitigations that we can put in place in order to reduce the severity of the occurrence of these issues happening, to make our product, at the end of the day, safer for our consumers. Now, we've understood what our product is, how it's being packaged, and the processes that we took to get there. We've also understood the risks involved. And now we'll look at the testing. Testing is always done with a risk-based approach. So let's say you have a sample and it needs to be sterilized, right, like the needles. What we then do is take the product with its packaging through to environmental and transportation testing and simulation. We then conduct, generally, visual inspection, and that's then taken to a whole number of tests for the packaging itself. So what we'll do now, this is the general flow chart, but we'll go into the individual areas just to understand a little bit more of what that means. So if we look at the transportation simulation testing, we generally look at 2 different, one ASTM standard and the second the ISTA standard, right? 2 standards which can help us take our product through. So how do we do that? So the ISTA standard 2A is generally used for environmental conditioning. That means we'd like to see how the environment, changes in temperature and humidity can impact our product, if in any way. We also then do, through the ASTM-D 4169, we take our product and our packaging through a whole number of cycles. They're called schedules on the standard, and that basically tries to simulate the process that your package will go through during its transportation and shipping phase. So it might start at a warehouse, be manually held onto a truck, travel with the truck onto an airplane, it reaches destination, goes into another truck on the way to the warehouse, where it's again manually held. Right, so we choose the correct schedule that best simulates the actual process, shipping process that your package will go through. And that's to understand if your package is able to withstand these tests and if your product will be safe during these times. You can see we've got 2 different examples here of failed transportation simulation testing. So on the right-hand side, you see a carton box which has a very large hole that's been created during the testing, and this could potentially injure your product too. And on the left-hand side, a box which says fragile on it, and it should have been handled with care, and it wasn't, and it's been impacted during the shipping. So these are some of the things that we're looking out for, and each company will come up with the acceptance criteria. What's allowed, what's not allowed, and what is okay. In some companies, some sort of aesthetic damage might be okay, as long as your product has not been affected. But it really depends on your company policy. So we said that we do these tests, right? Environmental, transportation, but then the package itself needs to be tested too. So some of the tests that we conduct are as follows. We've got the dye test, where your package is basically tampered with a little bit with some blue dye. It's put into a vacuum pressure vessel. And what we're trying to do is to force that blue dye from one side of the package to the other to see if there's been any damage to the seal. And what you can see here on the picture is that the plastic itself at the front has some blue dye in it, which means the seal integrity is not good. It's not strong enough, and the dye is able to penetrate, and that's a problem. We'll call it a failure. Second one, the peel test. We'd like to understand how much force do we need in order to open the package, right? And this is important because during transportation, it's going to be moving around. It might have things on top of it, and maybe that will open the seal. Lastly, the burst test. How much pressure is required in order to burst open the package? And of course, each of these tests will need to be made specific to your package type, right? So we spoke a little bit about the package itself being tested. What about the process? So if we go back to our original example, we spoke about our blister pack, which would be going through a blistering process. So some of the control variables that we need to focus on during the process are as follows. We've got machine speed. How fast are we producing these blister packs? What is the machinability of the blister material? right? Now we also look at the forming temperature and pressure. And forming is forming the plastic heads that we look at. And secondly, the sealing temperature and pressure. Sealing is at the point where the thin foil layer will be stuck onto the PVC, the plastic layer. And during validation, what we want to look at and want to check following the process is what's our sealing quality, right? Do we have any leaks, like we spoke about the dye test? Should we be concerned? We have to conduct the dye test and see if the seal integrity and the quality is where it should be. Do we have any holes? Or we do visual inspection and we check the appearance of the package. We have to check if there are any holes, any things that we're missing. Was all the information exactly where it should be? And we look at the product quality. What we might also want to do is test the product at different stages afterwards in case there were any holes that we missed, because air could in the end affect the quality of your product. So this is a good example that we can take and sort of start thinking about in a process what we need to check. And where are some of the points that validation really focuses on. So today we spoke about many, many interesting things. We started off with validation. We said that first and foremost, validation for our package is a regulatory requirement. But in addition to that, it also provides many other benefits. It allows us to be safe, allows us to understand that our product is safe, it has a high integrity, and ensures the security and quality of your product for your user or patient at the end of the day. We said there are 3 overarching steps which we spoke about and looked into. The first one is a product information gathering, understanding what our product is, what are the processes required to make our package. Right, once we've understood that, we're going to the product damage impact assessment, understanding what the risks involved are. What are the package issues? If something were to happen during transportation, how will be that risk to the consumer? Right, and we then broke it into 4 different categories, from critical to minor. Minor being the safest one and in the green zone. And then with that in mind, we then went to the testing selection, understanding what tests need to be conducted for our packaging process as well as for our packaging itself. We said that all validation has a whole number of prerequisites which need to be set in stone and need to be completed. And in addition, all validation is covered by a validation master plan, whereby we set out what is required to be done, how, and through which means. We know that there are a number of tests that are available to validate both your package and your process. And it's really, really important that we are always up to date with the latest technology, which constantly is changing, as well as, of course, the legislation, right, from our regulatory bodies. So thank you everyone for your time today. I really hope you've enjoyed and learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.